welcome to the ODAC Title IX talk. This is the 7th ODAC Title IX talk. I have a wonderful opportunity to interview a really good friend of mine. So Louise, for those of people who don't know you, who are you, what do you do, and let's let everybody know.
Meg, it is great to be here. I always love engaging with the ODAC, so thank you so much for asking me. Louise McCleary. I am currently the Vice President of Division III at the NCAA. I have been in this role not quite a year. So last April, I moved from the interim to the Vice President. Before that, I spent 10 years at the NCAA. I started as a Director in Governance, moved to a Managing Director, and then currently as the Vice President. And before that, I spent about 25 years in a variety of college campuses. Working my way, I started as a sports information director, and then throughout those 25 years, I ended my career on campus as an athletics director at a Division III school up in the New England area. So excited to be here. And then for everybody in the ODAC, they may have heard this before, but I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, very close to Virginia Wesleyan. So the ODAC, its members, the location, very near and dear to my heart since that's where I grew up.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for spending time. Obviously, nice to get to spend time with you. Why we're really here and what we're talking about is Title IX and a celebration of 50 years of Title IX. So I think the first one to get us started is just the personal impact. I mean, your years and experience over your time, but the impact of Title IX on your professional career.
Yeah, so I will give away my age. I was 7 years old when Title IX was passed. And I'll say that probably when I was that young, and even as a teenager, it didn't impact me the way it impacted others. And part of that reason, as I mentioned, I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. So for those of you who are near my age, maybe a little older, if you go back, Old Dominion University was a powerhouse in women's basketball. Back in the AIAW days, think Nancy Lieberman, Mary Ann Stanley, Ann Donovan. All of those women were at Old Dominion. My father taught there, so I had a chance. That's who I grew up with. Those were my idols. So they were the best in the country. And so I got to see women excelling. At the time, Old Dominion women's basketball probably averaged about 8,000 fans. The men, on the other hand, were not as good, so they didn't have as many fans come. So again, I was like, well, this is the norm, of course. I also had two parents who, as they were raising me, the youngest of 4 children, their daughter said, you can do anything you want to do. Put your mind to it, work hard. So I did that. I went to a women's college. So again, right? So women were at the front. Of course, this is what we're going to do. Of course, you have every opportunity to lead. There are no obstacles. It wasn't until I started my career in athletics after college that I said, well, where are all the women? And so keep in mind, that's the early 90s. And back then, it was absolutely a male-dominated field. And that's where it started to come into me to say, okay, maybe as a woman in athletics, I don't have as many opportunities as my male counterparts. Maybe I'm not being paid as well as my male counterparts. And that's it. At that moment, I realized there's some unique challenges that I had been insulated from growing up in the family that I did grow up, the experiences that I had in college at a women's college. But it opened my eyes to say there were still so many people who, because of the passage of Title IX, said, we want to make sure that we give opportunities to women. We want to make sure that we open those doors and that, as I like to say, I got to play in the sandbox just like anybody else and show my skill set. So I probably had a different path than most. But again, once I got to that first career opportunity, that's when I noticed, okay, there are some differences and there's some areas that women are still lagging behind. 50 years later, we've made some progress, but there's also still some area of growth for us to go.
I agree. And I want to go back to that. Like the first time you really experienced it, when you saw it getting into intercollegiate athletics, how has that changed, and how did that maybe change your career path or your outlook when you kind of got into it and figured out, that we might be more of a minority at that point, and then how did that impact as you progressed through your career of intercollegiate athletics?
Yeah, and Meg, this is something that I try to do every day right now, and that's mentor men and women who are just starting out in this career, to give them the confidence to say, you will face obstacles. You will face individuals that maybe don't want you to succeed. Again, I had very supportive parents. I had positive reinforcement, and I'm stubborn. So for me, I got into it and I was like, well, I think I can still do this, even if you weren't surrounded by individuals that were like you. I still had the confidence to say, I can go forward and I can make a difference. And so today, as I work with early career professionals, I think it's so critical, especially for women who are getting into the field of athletic administration or coaching or whatever it is, where they are not in the majority, to be able to help them build their confidence. Because when you get knocked down, as you've heard, especially with your role at Women Leaders, it's just an opportunity to say, I'm going to get back up, but maybe I need to do it a little differently next time. And so over time, over my career, more and more women have come into the field. That's been exciting to see. Pay has started to equal out a little bit. There are opportunities. And so while there may have been many more detractors 30 years ago, today, there are many more opportunities. And I think that comes back to Title IX, but also the men who have been in those positions willing to say, let us help you open those doors. Let us support you. And even more importantly, what I think you hear all the time in your current role, not only as an athletic director in the ODAC, but about to become the president for Women Leaders, is women have to support women. It's this, I fought so hard to get to the top of the hill. Well, you better reach down and make sure that the next generation can have that path and maybe have it a little more easy to get there than what you did.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. And maybe that's why we've gotten along so well over the years. You hit on a key point that I think a lot of times we don't necessarily talk about, that maybe we needed some male allies and what those folks look like. And I think about it as I've been involved with you with a few different programs you've really sunk your teeth into. The new AD program for Division III, right? And getting those new ADs in and trying to help them with all those, but the men and the women together would look, this may not be easy on most days, but trying to encourage that. And then obviously your support of Women Leaders through Division III with all you do there. Talk a little bit about male allies and what that looks like in your opinion, especially kind of in helping now in your current role with able to make such a difference with new ADs, both men and women.
Absolutely. So I was just looking the other day in Division III, and we lead the association. 33% of our athletic directors are women. It's awesome. I would love to see it at 50. But what that means is that the majority of our athletic directors are men. And I think they have a full understanding that for their institutions and their conferences to really grow, you have to have diversity of thought. Diversity of thought comes from gender, it comes from socioeconomic experiences, it comes from ethnic and racial backgrounds. And I have found, at least the leaders that I have encountered within our division, there is a real willingness and an intentionality to say, how do I help? How do I open doors? After that, you need to do the work. You need to come in. You need to be able to make yourself shine to be able to advance. But I think that our division has really embraced this concept of there is strength when we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll give a shout out to Brad Bankston, the commissioner of the ODAC, his staff there. They have really programs like this to be able to say, how do we continue to keep this conversation alive and make sure that we're all working together to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core component of what we're doing in the conference?
Absolutely. What do you think now that you're right? You're at the top. You're right. You've now gone kind of through that process, and you may not see it that way. That I sure do. Like you're kind of at the pinnacle of right. That here's the person in charge of Division III. What do you see that role now as you also think about maybe that women leaders lift as you rise, and not only empowering young men, but empowering young women in their roles? And I'm happy to go on the record. You've been one of my mentors and friends, and I've been lucky to experience that. Who are some of those that maybe you looked up to throughout your career? And who are some of those that, you're trying to lift and pull up as you continue on your path?
Yeah. So I think you asked me 3 questions there,
I
but
did.
I'm going to work through that. Okay.
I got excited about all of them.
No, so the very first thing I want to say is now as the vice president, what is so important for our membership is the ability to listen to them and to create spaces for them to give feedback. We've all been dealing with the pandemic, but one of the most important things is how do we continue to strengthen our governance structure? All of you, athletic directors, student athletes, presidents, everyone in between, how do we help you serve on those different committees and councils to represent the entire division? That's my role, is to say, how do we make that as strong as possible? How do we make sure we're continuing to listen? Because if things are good at the national office, but they're really difficult on campus, we want to break down that disconnect. We want to say, okay, while things are good here at the national office, maybe right now in terms of finances, we understand the struggles that are going on campus. So I think that's the most important role that I play as the vice president, to continue to reinforce the value of the governance structure, the importance of our membership to lead our division, and making sure we always provide space to listen and to get feedback, and then to let our governance structure, our committees, engage and move forward and make changes on the best interest of the division. Okay, I'm going to forget the second question, but then I'm going to go to the third in terms of who inspired me. And what I will say is that many times I used to go to women leaders before it was women leaders, when it was NACWA, and I would watch women who I never got to know necessarily, but I watched how they engaged with others. And I picked all the strengths that I said, I want to try to emulate that. So back in the day, Peggy Bradley Dopus was an associate athletic director at Michigan. And she didn't know it, but she was a huge mentor, because I could watch how she behaved and said, I want to make sure I do that. Louise O'Neill, the longtime athletics director at Wellesley College. Again, I went to Wellesley, so I knew her. I didn't know her really well, but there were times where she gave me nuggets of professional advice that became invaluable. Again, in that area, a Lori Priest. There were women who took me under their wing to say, here are things that you need to do to improve your skills to be able to advance your career. And I took that to heart. They didn't have to do that, but really, really impactful for me. And then, again, I've got to work with Dan Dutcher for 10 years, the best of the best. It was really a great opportunity to learn from him about the NCAA, the governance structure, and really all of the inner workings. That's something that those 10 years were invaluable for me. So I can't remember the middle question, but maybe you did, and you'll circle back and say, okay, answer this one also.
Oh, if I had enough time, I'd ask everything if I can get it. I want to circle back to something that you mentioned. So you're right. Division III is a leader, right? When it comes to when you look at numbers, and it's not all about numbers, but there's something to be said about numbers and percentages. There's obviously something that we're doing right that others could learn from. But I think as we've had these conversations about Title IX, right, you have some people that are like, hey, look how far we've come. But there's also this other conversation of, God, it's been 50 years and we're not there yet. So what does that look like? What do you think about that? What does that take and how do we get there? Answer the world's problems.
Yeah, well, here's what I will say, and this is just my belief. Progress sometimes is slow. And so I mentioned, and I am thrilled that 33% of our athletic directors are women, by far the most in any division. The other day, along with that data, for the first time ever, we have more than 10% of our athletic directors who are individuals of color. So some may say, okay, if it's 11%, that's not a great number, but 10 years ago, it was at 4%. So again, we are making progress in the right direction. And where that comes from is a couple of things. What I think our division has done really well is about 10 years ago, we said we want to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a focus. And we're going to do it from a three-prong approach. We're going to educate presidents and chancellors. They are well aware the value diversity brings to their campuses. But again, in Division III, only 70% of our athletic directors report to somebody other than the president or chancellor. So it was really important to reach out to them to say, whoever is overseeing athletics, we need them to be just as intentional with their athletic director hires as they are with their faculty hires. That was the first approach. The second approach was to say, how do we take mid-level administrators, women, individuals of color, and say, let's be more intentional in opening doors and providing professional development opportunities. We have a couple programs. Some have been around for 3 or 4 years. Others have been around for almost 10 years. Those are paying dividends for us. And what we've always said is, if you don't want to necessarily advance, some people are really thrilled being a great number 2. Will you take the time to intentionally engage the next generation? And that's the third component is we have programs for students. And again, it's that intentional engagement to say, if this is your dream, let us help you learn how to hone your skills to fulfill that dream. And many times, and you probably see it on campus more than I do, especially with women, they don't have that confidence. All it may take is a coach or an administrator or a commissioner or somebody else to say, I think you have the skill set to be a great X. Fill it in. Right. And sometimes that lights the fuse to let them say, yeah, I'm going to go for this. And our athletic directors and our commissioners have done a really, really good job. And then we take advantage of groups like Women Leaders and MOA and other areas to say, in our Office of Inclusion at the NCAA to say, you have resources. How do we build on that and make sure the institutions in Division III that want it can find it and can implement it? So progress is slow. I will retire down the road, and I hope at that point, 20 years down the road, instead of having 33% of our athletic directors, currently, Meg, our associate ADs are split 50-50. That tells you that down the road, our athletic directors may be split 50-50. We continue to attract and have more individuals of color working in Division III. We have wonderful feeder programs. I am hopeful that those also open doors. And I'll say it again, diversity within our athletic departments, within our lives, only makes us stronger.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely couldn't agree more. Maybe to speak specifically to that, right? Hopefully we have ODAC student athletes watch this. We have ODAC coaches and administrators, but even beyond that reach, the others that may see this, what specific advice would you have for young women in particular, whether they're student athletes, whether they're coaches, whether they're administrators? What advice would you have for them as they navigate this?
Yeah, so the very first one I would say is learn to use your voice. And so many times, especially early in your career, if you're invited to a table, if you're invited to a meeting, if you have an opportunity with your team, do you use your voice to contribute to the conversation? And sure, we can all email, we can all text, but there's value in verbalizing and using your voice. The trick comes is if I say, well, I believe in this, and that idea people don't take, you automatically assume it was a bad idea. And what I would say is reframe that. You have to keep using your voice, because while the very first time somebody hears it, they may not accept it. The second or third time, especially if you come with facts and to back it up and everything you need, there's a good chance that your idea will take seed somehow to allow for positive change. That alone, because I'm saying something that is really hard to do, but that would be my one piece of advice, is that if you have the opportunity, use your voice.
I think it's such great advice, right? And for me, that was such good advice for me. And so if I think about, right, my personality type, for those people that know me, right, I'm a pretty high D. I'll tell it the way it is. I have no problem speaking up. What about those folks who don't even know how to get a seat at the table? How do we get those people to get the seat at the table? What do they do to get that foot in the door?
Yeah, so I'm going to stereotype a little bit. I believe all Division III student athletes work really, really hard, and they work to hone their skills. They understand the benefits of teamwork, dedication. So I say that you take sort of all of those skill sets to say, all right, maybe I'm not trying to get better at my golf, I'm on the golf team, or my basketball or my swimming, but I need to find a way to get at the table. And so it's similar. It's relationship building. How do I build relationships with others? How do I show them that I understand the issue that's at hand, or the topic? How do I show them that I'm going to be there every day, my full self, that I am ready to work hard? And if you do that, you will be invited to the table. I know you will. Yeah. And I say this to early career, even mid-career, if you're doing all of the right things, and every day, or more days than not, you keep running into roadblocks, while it will be difficult, that's the time to say, do I need to do something else? Because these are all the right things, but I'm not advancing in my current situation. And we all have bad days, but again, it's a pretty simple motto. I always say, but if you're having more bad days than good days, step back and evaluate, is that still the best place for you to be?
Absolutely. Maybe a little harder, and right, because it can't all be easy. Division III is a leader in this, and philosophically, I think for you and I, where we very much align, there's a reason we chose Division III, and why our coaches and student athletes chose Division III, and it was the right philosophical fit for them. In your opinion, how do Division II and Division I figure out that works? And it's not saying that they're not making progress as well, but the progress obviously isn't as fast or not as noticeable. And so where have we missed the mark, right? Because if it's intercollegiate athletics and everybody talks about it as a whole, they talk about the NCAA, they don't necessarily break us out, when there's so many great things that you're doing, and there's a lot of folks doing, but it doesn't necessarily replicate in some of those numbers that might make ESPN. How do we move that needle?
Well, and it is moving again, right? So progress is slow. I would say, and I know that in Division II and Division I, they are working just as hard at diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are different pressures. As soon as there are higher pressures in terms of generating revenue, having media contracts. So again, I don't know if it's necessarily always those institutions, but the pressures in the outside world, and you can see that. You look, last night was the State of the Union. You look at Congress, they have made progress to change the makeup of Congress, but it's been slow. You look at corporations, more and more women are starting to get into those CEO roles, but it has been slow. And I think as we all as a collective continue to break down those barriers, some may move faster than others, but if we're all sort of moving the ship in the same direction, the change will come about. I will never be critical as long as the change is occurring. Yes, in my world, I would like sometimes for it to happen faster. But if a division like Division II and Division I are putting in all the effort for those changes, then I support that 100%, as I'm pretty sure our Division III colleagues do as well. But they know, as you and I know, on a Division III campus, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe I have more control. Maybe I have a closer tie to our president or our vice president. And that will allow me to implement some changes a little bit faster than at a large university with 40,000 students, right? So it's happening. It's just slightly different. And there are probably some in Division III who say it's not happening fast enough. I would say that around our athletic directors of color. There are so many talented individuals out there. The time will come when those openings occur that those individuals are being given an opportunity to compete for that job just like anybody else.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What does it look like, as you look at the future? What do you hope to continue to do in your current role? And maybe that short term and long term, how do we continue to make sure that Title IX, continues to, we continue to educate. I worry sometimes that our current student athletes, we just had National Girls and Women in Sports Day on campus the other day, reminding our student athletes, what Title IX was, is, right. It's as they think about it now as maybe some different things, and making sure they understand and we educate and that we work with youth to do that. But what does it look like in the short term and long term that continues to make you feel good about what you do?
Yeah. Well, one is I get to work right next door to our Office of Inclusion, and they do such good work in this space. They partner with different groups. I've mentioned women leaders, but they're also working with the High School Federation. They're working with researchers to say, how do we keep this top of mind? How do we continue to provide resources? And most importantly, how do we continue to remind individuals the value of diversity? And so I think that's the short term. I think it's great that today's female student athletes, they have less of an understanding of the struggle. And that's okay. That's okay to say we've moved that needle, but what you have to make sure is that they're willing to continue to move the needle. And I think we've talked about this, that today's men and women are willing to do that. And if there becomes roadblocks again, going back to say, here are the reminders of why we need to do this. We'll probably do another report at Title IX at 60. I hope we continue to see change, but what I've also seen is when you have change, sometimes you take one step forward and you take two steps back. We are at a unique time, I think, in our history. So while I think we will continue to move forward in the next 10 years, it probably will not be at the speed that you would like, or maybe I would like. But hopefully, if leaders continue to say, this is important, this is why it's important, and there's an understanding of that, I think we'll always continue to move the needle forward.
That's great. And I couldn't agree more, both personally and professionally. And I guess that's kind of what I get to wrap up with, because I have you trapped on a Zoom on an interview. So, so two things for you, Louise. One, personally, thank you. I would not be where I am in my career without you. And when it comes to mentors and leaders and friends, it does take people in the industry to help. And you have been one of my mentors, and I appreciate that. On a professional note, right, on behalf of women leaders, the support that you've given that organization, that has been a life changer for me and for many others, that support continues to go extremely well noticed and expose more Division III young women to what a career in intercollegiate athletics is like. So I can't thank you enough for your continued support of that organization. So for me, it's personal, professional, and a pretty awesome opportunity. I get to interview you and talk to you about Title IX and the impact it's had on you and our industry.
Well, it's been fun. What I would say, for everyone in the ODAC, you should find a way to become a member of Women Leaders. They have so much programming that happens every week for women to be able to connect with other women, to be able to grow your network, to be able to grow professionally. Ask your athletics director, ask your conference office, but take advantage of being a member, because that will open other doors to go to their summer institutes. It will allow you to meet women outside of your conference, and that there's value in that, and there's strength in that. And so I am thrilled to always support women leaders. I know Division III also is. And Meg, we can't wait to see you as its president next year, which is awesome. You know, we're pretty lucky. We're going to have you as a Division III person leading women leaders. Currently, of our Division III Commissioners Association is a woman. Currently, of Nadia, our athletic directors group, it's a woman. And so it's a really neat time in history for Division III, and it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Just as excited as you are, and as women leaders, and even as you opened us up with, right? It's lift as you rise. And our job now is to make sure that the next generation has those opportunities, and those opportunities are open to them. And we'll continue to answer. I'm sure you'll answer any phone call. I'll answer any phone call, whatever we can do to continue to better the cause and do what's best, not only for our young women, but for our division and for intercollegiate athletics in general.
Yeah. Well, this was fun. I always enjoy talking to you. Again, I can't thank Brad Bankston, JJ Nekoloff, the entire ODAC conference staff for continuing to push the envelope and to support women and to have these Title IX talks. It's been a lot of fun for me to participate today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I agree. Thank you for the invite, Brad and others, especially being the new kid on the block in the ODAC. Exciting opportunity for us to get together, and great for our conference and beyond.
Great. Thanks so much, Meg.
Thanks, Louise.